Subscribe for more stories and show your support by giving this video a thumbs up. Orion Silverhoof and the Great Wind Race. Living on the highest peaks of the Crystal Valley, unicorns were the most graceful creatures in the world. Their coats shone like pearls, their manes waved in rainbow colors, and most importantly, their feet barely touched the ground when they ran. They danced with the wind, gliding as they moved. However, Orion was different. Orion wasn't slender and graceful like the others. His ribcage was broad, and his legs were thick and muscular. His biggest problem was with gravity. While other unicorns skipped gracefully with a light clip-clop, Orion walked with a heavy thud-thud, shaking the ground. His horn wasn't spiraled and long like the others, it was somewhat short and blunt. And his color wasn't that famous bright white, but a dark gray resembling storm clouds. The other young unicorns in the valley, especially a golden-maned, arrogant unicorn named Lancelot, often made fun of him. "Hey Orion!" Lancelot would shout, gliding in the air. "Trying to drill through the Earth's crust again? If you stomp a little harder, you'll reach the core of the world." Orion tried to laugh off these jokes, but deep down, he was sad. All he wanted was to feel the wind on his face, but instead of the wind, he felt the earth. One morning, a bright banner was hung on the announcement stone in the center of the valley. The Great Wind Race, who is the fastest in the valley. This race was held once every 10 years. The course started from the flowery meadow, passed through the misty swamp, and ended at the peak of the Dragon Cliffs. Everyone was sure Lancelot would win. He was one of the horses who used wind magic the best. Looking at the banner, Orion felt a spark inside. "I'm going to join too," he whispered. His friend beside him, a small blue fairy named Twinkle, fluttered her wings in worry. "Orion, are you sure? That course is very tough. And the others, they can fly." "I know, Twinkle," said Orion, pawing the ground with his hoof. "But I love running. Not flying, running. And the rule of this race says whoever reaches the finish line first wins. It doesn't say whoever arrives flying, . Orion decided to train, but he didn't know how. He tried to hover in the air like the others, but every time he fell to the ground with a thump. Someone was watching him from afar. Living among the rocks at the edge of the valley was an old, grumpy mountain goat with a broken horn, old Bart. Bart had once coached legendary racers. He climbed down to Orion. "You're doing it wrong, kid," Bart said, chewing on his beard. "I'm trying to fly," said Orion, out of breath. "That's exactly the problem," said Bart. "You are not a kite. You are a rock. And rocks don't fly, they roll. If you fight against your nature, you lose. If you use your nature, no one can stop you." "What do you mean?" "They use the wind," Bart said, tapping Orion's strong legs. "You, however, will use the earth. Your power isn't in the air, it's on the ground. Do you trust me?" Orion saw the wisdom in this grumpy goat's eyes. "I trust you." For the next 3 weeks, Orion spent the hardest days of his life. While Lancelot and the others practiced graceful leaps in the meadows, old Bart took Orion to the steepest slopes and muddiest trails. "Stomp harder!" Bart shouted. "Push the ground! Draw power from the soil! Run as if you are pushing the world backward every time your hoofs touch the ground." Orion ran uphill with heavy logs tied to his legs. He learned to balance on sharp rocks. He figured out the technique of moving on muddy roads without slipping. The other unicorns laughed when they saw him in this filthy state. Orion returned home every evening covered in mud and exhausted. But something had changed. His leg muscles had turned into steel cables. And he no longer got tired when running. On the contrary, the more he ran, the more energized he became. The race day arrived. The sky was deep blue, the sun was shining bright. 12 unicorns lined up at the starting line. They were all sparkling, showing off with ribbons tied to their manes. Lancelot's horn looked like it had been dipped in gold. In the very last lane was Orion. His coat was matte grey, with no ornaments on him. There was only a determined look in his eyes, and Twinkle, an old Bart waving at him from the stands. The referee, a phoenix, spread its wings and let out a shrill cry. Start! The race began with a burst. Lancelot and the others shot forward, leaving a cloud of magical dust behind. Their feet barely touched the grass, they were practically gliding in the air. Orion, on the other hand, was coming from behind, going thud, thud, thud. Because he was heavy, it took time for him to accelerate. In the first section, the flowery meadow, Lancelot was far ahead. The crowd was cheering. Orion was last. But he wasn't worried. Bart had taught him, the start of the race is for show, the end is for power. When they reached the second stage of the course, the misty swamp, the weather changed. This place was covered in damp, heavy, and magic-dispelling fog. The graceful unicorns running by gliding in the air began to struggle in this dense atmosphere. Their magic weakened inside the fog. Their feet inevitably began to touch the ground. But they weren't used to it. Their thin ankles sank into the mud, their delicate hoofs slipped. Lancelot stumbled. What is this mud? He shouted as his white fur got dirty. His speed had dropped by half. Just at that moment, a sound was heard from behind. Thud! 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 Rhythmic and powerful, like a locomotive. Orion was coming. Mud? It was as if Orion was born in the mud. He had practiced in the mud with Bart for weeks. His broad hoofs didn't sink, instead, they gripped the surface. His powerful legs tore through the sludge. Orion passed his rivals stuck in the swamp one by one. He passed graceful Bella. He passed swift-winged Felix. And at the exit of the swamp, he caught up with Lancelot, who was struggling in the mud. Lancelot looked at him in astonishment. How? Orion just smiled and passed him like a tank. When he emerged from the swamp, Orion was in the lead. But ahead of him was the toughest leg, Dragon Cliffs. This place was steep, rugged, and slippery. Moreover, a sudden mountain storm had erupted. The wind was so violent that it was hard even to stand. Lancelot had gathered his magic power, escaped the swamp, and accelerated again. By flying on the flat road, he closed the gap. When they reached the foot of the slope, they were side by side again. Lancelot tried to rise using wind magic. But the storm was so strong that it tossed him around like a leaf. For unicorns gliding in the air, wind was an advantage, but a storm was a disaster. They were losing control. Orion, however, was glued to the ground. Old Bart's voice echoed in his ears. You are a rock, Orion. The wind cannot blow a rock away. Orion lowered his head, lowered his center of gravity, and began to climb. Sparks flew every time his hoofs struck the hard rocks. The wind battered him but couldn't move him. While Lancelot struggled with the wind, he started falling behind. His grace was useless against this wild nature. Orion's brute force and solid footing were exactly for this moment. As they approached the summit, oxygen decreased, and fatigue increased. Orion's lungs were burning. His legs were shaking. "I want to stop," said a voice inside him. Then, on the side of the road, he saw old Bart perched on the rocks. Bart stood calmly in the middle of the storm, nodding his head to signal, "Keep going." And Twinkle. Even though the small fairy couldn't fly in the storm, she was holding onto Bart's horn, shouting with all her might, "Run, Orion! Show the power of the earth!" Orion took a deep breath. He released that grey storm inside him. With one last effort, he sped up. The slope ended, the summit appeared. The finish line was a red ribbon stretched between two giant rocks. He heard Lancelot coming with a final burst from behind, but Orion's momentum was unstoppable. His powerful hoofs struck the rock one last time and he broke the ribbon with his chest. Orion couldn't stop after crossing the line. He ran a few more meters and collapsed from exhaustion. His chest was heaving like bellows. The storm subsided, the clouds dispersed. The sun came out again. The other unicorns arrived at the finish line one by one. They were all exhausted. Lancelot came up to Orion. His shiny golden mantle was messy and covered in mud. Orion tried to stand up. Lancelot bowed his head. This was a bow of respect. "You beat us," Lancelot said, out of breath. "Without using magic, without flying. Just by running." "This is my magic," said Orion, smiling. "I love gravity." The Phoenix referee placed the rainbow medal around Orion's neck. The crowd went wild. They had seen that not only the graceful but also the strong and resilient could win. After that day, things changed in Crystal Valley. Young unicorns no longer tried only to fly, they ran uphill to get strong legs like Orion. They weren't afraid of mud, they started to love the earth. Orion was still the same Orion. He still walked with a thud-thud, shaking the ground. He still wasn't very graceful. But no one called him heavy anymore. They now called him by a new name, Stormbreaker. Old Bart stroked his beard as he watched them from in front of his cave. "Rocks don't fly," he muttered. "But they climb the summit solidest of all." Orion went for a run in the valley at sunset with his friend Twinkle, feeling the wind on his face and the earth in his heart. The end.